LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi, everyone. Stephen Van Tassel, vertebrate pest specialist. Yes, that's my day job. I got a little screwed up here. So again, I'm from Wildlife Control Consultant. Really glad to have you on board here. We have a very special guest. Of course, those of you who've been following the podcast are familiar with it, Dr. Niamh Quinn of University of California Cooperative Extension. She is, now get this title now, this is California, so we'll let you deal with that in your own, Human Wildlife Interactions Advisor. How about that? So my day job is vertebrate pest specialist, but she's a human wildlife interaction advisor. But there is a lot of counseling in our work, isn't there, Dr. Quinn? Yes, I'd say half of my job is counseling with people. Well, really glad to have you on board. We're interested in some of the work that you've done. First, tell us a little about yourself, obviously, and then just to remind those who are new to the podcast what you do, and then we'd like to get some of that research that you've done on rats, and then of course your rodent academy that you're offering. Of course, things are full, almost pretty much full by now. Probably by the time this goes out, it'll be full, but people may want to stay tuned or maybe draw it to their state. So let's see how that goes.
Well, as you said, Stephen, I'm the Human Wildlife Interactions Advisor, but at the office they call me the Rat Whacker. So that kind of is that's like the subtitle to what I do. But I'd say, my program is kind of, because I work with Extension, my program is split like kind of 50-50 between research and then extending the information that we get from the research to the people that need it. So in my case, it's mostly PMPs, but I also do coyote work. So sometimes it's like, wildlife managers, people like residents or city folks, city managers and stuff like that, because as you may or may not know, there's coyotes everywhere.
Yeah,
they may be as ubiquitous as the rats now in some of the cities in California.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
It's pretty cool when we go to catch them as well, because they're much easier to catch now that there's so many of them.
Oh, no kidding. All right. Well, so I think our audience would be very interested in coyotes. Coyotes was kind of almost like a sacred creature within the vertebrate pest community and certainly the fur industry as well, or the rodent one. We hope we talk about both. But anything new coming along? What have you been doing?
Well, we're working hard on a number of projects. We just finished a best management practices project that was funded by the California Department of Pesticide Regulation. And the idea behind that was to try and see if there are are there different successes among the different management types. And I have to say, where we started was trying to develop best management practices. And it's trying to develop best management practices to reduce rodenticide exposure, but also to manage rodents, right? Those two things are equally as important as each other. And so, it was kind of difficult. And so here in California, your listeners may or may not know, we have some, serious rodenticide issues, although with the proposed interim decisions with EPA, our California's problems could become everybody else's problems too.
Right.
And so, my thought is that we would go from the kind of the creme de la creme of what is considered the best in rodent management, which is second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, to what would happen if we didn't have anticoagulant rodenticides, or any kind of rodenticide, which is a trapping only program, and then something in the middle, which was a mix of both.
So you tested those three hypotheses then?
Yeah, okay. and we tested it in a number of ways. The first way we used is we use these tracking tunnels. These tracking tunnels they're becoming really popular in especially in California rodent research, but I've seen them in other rodent research projects in the US now as well. But they're really popular in New Zealand, which is actually the only place that you can purchase them from.
They're expensive though.
And you know what? It's not that they're expensive, it's getting them to the US is expensive. Yeah. And then all the bureaucracy with customs and all that kind of stuff.
Gosh, yeah.
It's definitely a pain in the rear end. But we use them. And then I have to say, this is one of the most bizarre research projects I've ever been involved in, because we caught the rats and we put little collars on them. And then we let them go, and then we try to kill them, which is usually not what happens when you do these kinds of wildlife tracking programs. Usually you hope that when you because you spend so much effort and money trying to collar these animals, that you hope that they live for a long time, but not us. And so so that was kind of, we looked to see like how long these animals would survive essentially, because with the anticoagulant rodenticides, we wouldn't necessarily always recover the body. And in fact, we almost never recovered the body. Even though we could track to where the rat was, we very, very rarely, because, and I think that reflects like at least the small amount of evidence we have for carcass collection. Here in California, we've got one study that suggests that I think it's something like 85% of ground squirrels die below ground, like inaccessible to predators. And then I think in Europe, they have another study that says for Norway rat control, like 90-something% of their animals died in spots that were inaccessible to large predators. So it makes sense, right, that even though we were there every day, we still weren't really recovering either like animals that were kind of, drunk on rodenticide, so to speak, like either sublethally exposed or lethally exposed and just hadn't died yet, or animals that had died and we just didn't recover their body, which is interesting, and also interesting for the current proposed interim decisions too, that are requiring carcass searches for many applications, not in urban areas, but in agricultural areas. And I have to say, Stephen, I was blown away by the results, because it really, really surprised me that like scientists are really good at answering one question and coming up with 50 more. I feel like that's more actually what we're good at than actually solving the science sometimes.
Well, if you solve a problem, you're going to be out of a job, aren't you?
Yeah, so, pretty much, right? And so we like what we did was, we analyzed the results, and it showed that trapping was way more effective than either of the two other strategies.
For rats.
For rats.
For rats, okay.
For roof rats, because here where I am in California, we're very much in kind of roof rat territory.
Okay.
And I think that we're going to need more and more research on roof rats, because at least anecdotally, it appears that they are rapidly expanding across the United States. Now, they may never get to Montana, but they're coming up like southwards, and then, spreading up across the eastern seaboard as well. And so it was really interesting, but we had rodents that were like, we were trying to expose to rodenticides that were still moving after 100 days.
100 days? Did they just not? Well, I thought that you were using second gens and they were still moving after 100. Now, when you were looking for the bodies, because you obviously were getting a death signal, right? You were getting a death signal. Were you digging up to the locations?
No, we didn't dig anything. We just couldn't. We just knew that they stopped moving.
They stopped moving, and so you never tried to find. So you
we
lost a lot of collars.
We did try and find some of them, but we couldn't. We just couldn't recover them. And so, like, they could have gotten predated on. They could have gotten picked up. I mean, who knows? But we just know that they stopped moving.
Okay.
And so it was really interesting, and like trying to hypothesize, because we already know from our previous research that like the roof rats, they don't really like the bait stations.
Right.
And we are actually starting another project. We actually just started the fieldwork for that last Friday, to try and see, can we improve the use of the bait stations? But like, we were trying to figure out, like, why would a trap in a bait station work better than a bait in a bait station, right? A toxic bait in a bait station. And really the hypothesis that we came up with is that it's just there's way less decisions for the rat to make to die in a bait station with a trap than in a bait station with a bait.
Yeah, because you're just relying on movement. He just needs to move in the right direction. He doesn't need to eat anything. So that makes sense.
It doesn't need to eat enough. You know what I mean? Like there's a couple of things. It doesn't you can't be resistant to a trap.
Yeah.
So although we did have a funny situation one morning in a school where, I mean, I have so many funny situations in the lab all the time, but we caught a load of rats, we put collars on them, I'm like, I'll let these ones go over here where these ones, and then my staff was like, oh, well, I'll let this one over here where we caught it too. And I hadn't seen her, and I was coming back to meet her, and we're in the morning in a school, right? There's kids are starting to shuffle in, and I see the face, and I just know that something is wrong. And I was like, what happened? And she's like, well, I let it go, and the first thing it did was run straight into a trap station.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God. and she said, then I heard a, and she's like, oh my God.
Yeah,
like,
that's it.
It's hard, right? And so then she said she opened the bait station, and the rat was in there like, oh, like this, just inside the bait station going, what is happening with my life?
Oh
So
my
then,
gosh.
so she's like, okay, let's just get out of the bait station, let's get out of the trap station. So she encourages the rat to leave, and it just makes a beeline for the only group of kids in the entire like schoolyard. And
Yeah. All
so
right.
like they're like eating their breakfast on this like picnic table, and the rat
Yeah.
like shoots right under it, and it like shoves itself in under a pipe.
You know.
And the teacher's like, oh, I'm assuming you're going to take care of that. And I was like, absolutely. And my staff goes, what are you going to do? And I go, absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
I was like, that's $250 of a rat right there. I
That's
was
right.
like,
Not doing
it's
a thing.
staying there.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah.
What trap were you using in your trap stations?
We were using the VM ones with the have you seen those ones with the zip tie? So
Oh,
they were
okay. The
donated to
VM
us by
traps. So they were
VM.
the striker, the half striker bar, so you didn't have to touch the business end, not like a
Yeah, you
regular
just
wood
like
stream
pull, yeah, you just pull the thing out there.
with
So
zip. Okay.
yeah, and we don't have a
Those are pretty.
preference for,
Those are pretty cool. I like because you don't
yeah.
have to
I mean,
open it up.
they definitely saved us some time, but we don't
Yeah.
like we just take whatever is generously donated
Oh,
to
I
us.
see. Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
those
yeah.
are well, a little shout out to VM for contributing. That's really important. And so I'm always pleased when companies are willing to let their equipment go out for testing because there's a risk for that.
Yeah, I mean, we
There's a
don't, it's
risk.
not, it wasn't even like we were really, I mean, I think that a lot of the time, like, this time around for our bait station research, like, we just say that we're testing a conventional bait station because in my mind, Stephen, they're all the same. All bait stations are essentially the same.
Yeah.
They vary very little in design, and I
Mhm.
would love to know where the design from the bait station actually came from because I feel like bait stations were designed to keep non-targets away from bait. They weren't designed to kill rats.
Right.
And clearly in what we're seeing, they're not. I mean, they really aren't. And it could be like a number of things, right? It could be placement, it could be
Right.
design,
Yeah.
it could be, it could be population, it could be resistance for all we know. It could be a number of different things, but we don't know.
Yeah.
And like you can't like if you don't know how it's broken, you can't fix it,
Right. Yeah.
right? So
I
our
think.
new project is funded by the Pest Management Foundation,
Okay.
um, which is great. And we are looking at trying to improve the use of the bait stations. I keep telling my students, like, we're trying to get the butts in the seats,
Hmm.
right? Now, I mean, we don't know what happens when the rat gets in there, but we're trying to get the rat in there is half the battle, right? If we
Okay.
can get the rat in the bait station. And so we're looking at different bait station designs. So kind of conventional, a kind of a long tube type bait
Hmm.
station. We're looking at the rocks. We're also looking at some new like scents, like or attractants, maybe you could call them. I mean, it's hard
Okay.
to call things attractants because
Right.
I mean, it's hard to know like how far out they work, but like
Yeah.
we will have bait stations with no attractant and bait stations with attractant, and
Hmm.
and we'll be looking to see like does it increase the time that because there's a couple of things we want to do. We want to get the rat in there quicker, right? Because there's a delay, which we all know, right?
Right.
There's a delay of entry, but the delay is about 10 days. 10 days is
It's a
a
long,
long time if
long
you've got
time.
a bad rodent issue, right? If you're a PMP out there on the ground, like you can't lie to your customer and be like, I'm going to fix this straight away because you're not, right? Even if you have the ability, if you're outside of California to use a second gen, if you think of it, that's 10 days, probably +5, probably, right? If you're using a first gen, it's probably +10, maybe.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you're using
Yeah.
an acute rodenticide, well, then it's less. But like it takes a long time. So we're trying to reduce that. We want to increase the amount of the population that uses the bait station as well. That's a little harder for us to measure. And then we want to increase the amount of bait that's consumed. And that's really important for a place like California, where we may not have access to second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, right? We're relying on acute rodenticides, where and obviously the amount of any bait consumed is very important.
Right.
But
Right.
when baits are I would never say that a bait is not palatable. If it's registered by the EPA, it's considered palatable, right? But you could probably say that there's a scale of palatability with some of these baits.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
certainly that's been the experience. I mean, the fat, the soft baits have certainly found to be more, at least that's what some of the research says, and I think anecdotally it's been found to be the case as well, that the fat animals like fat. So I mean, that's just, so do
yeah,
we.
yeah. That's
So
why high fat, high sugar, high protein. I was like
yeah,
a bit like myself,
that's it.
Stephen. Yeah.
Just it's if it's bad for you, it's probably tastes good. So
Yeah.
yeah, well, so those are, so you're looking at, are you going to be looking at specific brands of stations, or are you looking at different types? Like you talked about a tube, which sounds to me like the PVC
It's
inverted
actually
T
not.
style.
So, I mean, I can say which ones I mean, we're not, it's not really, I can tell you the brands of what we're testing, but it's
Mhm.
more the fact that they're different shapes. I think
Right.
that so we're looking at a rock from JT Eaton, but that's
Yeah.
also very similar to the rock from like
Mhm.
Bell and some of the other companies.
Okay.
And then we're looking at, it was some, and it's funny, you always think you have a great idea, and then you realize that your idea is just not that great because someone's already made it. So we
Right.
were
Right.
actually going to
Yeah.
3D print our own bait stations, and that actually came off our best management practices work, because what we saw is that our tracking tunnels, which are long,
Mhm.
rectangular, right, they're long, they're not a tube, they're long and rectangular.
Right. Right.
The rats loved them, Stephen. In and out and in and out and in and out all day, every day, right? They had no problems with them, right? So here you have a bait station with a lot of food in it, and they're not going into it, but they are going into the tracking tunnels. And now, like, try to
That's
describe it to
bizarre.
your yeah, and I'll try and describe it to your listeners, because it wouldn't be appropriate for bait, right? It's very open on one end, right? It's just a
Mhm.
piece of cardboard that's in a
Yep.
long, like, rectangular tunnel, right? I guess it's a tunnel.
Yeah.
And so we were gonna print something based on that, but we were gonna close off the ends, right? Now we were gonna make sure that you could see through, and obviously there's certain criteria you need. And then I was at Pest World, and one of the sales guys from Kness came up to me, and I was telling him, he's like, a bit like this thing, and I
Mhm.
was like, holy crap,
Yeah.
exactly like that thing.
They have an inverted T version. It has
It's
baffles in it
it's
to,
not it's actually not a T, it's a long tunnel, exactly like the tracking tunnel that has, and I think it's more marketed for trapping,
okay.
but there are baffles. You can put baffles in it as well.
All right. That's something new I haven't seen, because they have because I'm hoping to try out some of their inverted T stations on Richardson ground squirrels.
Yeah,
And so, because PVC pipe has just gotten ridiculous in
so expensive.
price.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, this is, I think this type of ground research. And so now I would be wondering, well, if you're gonna 3D manufacture your own station, you could mimic the long tube, but you still have to have a way to store the bait. So the rodent would
Yes,
still have to stop. And
yes.
part of the reason is they like those stations that have an L in it, so that an animal from the outside can't reach in and grab, or a kid. And so, yeah, it'd be interesting to find out
I mean, I think
how
it's
that would
it's going to be
work.
really interesting. And so we do a lot of our research in backyards, and we have the master gardeners, which I think are in every like cooperative extension in every
I
state.
think they
So
are. Yeah.
but then so we're doing most of our like this type of, excuse me, experiment in the backyards, but then we hope to upscale it a bit. And so I mean, I'm interested in so many things, Stephen,
Right.
like so many things, but you've probably heard this, and probably your listeners have heard this idea of like the alpha rat, the super rat
Hmm.
protecting the bait station. Like,
Right.
there's not really any evidence of that, but like it could be totally true. And like, I think that knowing more about how populations use the bait stations is going to be really important for management, especially when you get to like places where in California, where they are probably going to consider limitations on placements, right? Right? Like, like they have in BC, like British Columbia, like they have in like places like Europe, like that's probably going to happen. And if it happens in California, it's coming for everybody
It
else. Like,
is.
I
Yeah. It's
think
just.
what's coming down in EPA it's a small taster of what's going to happen in
Oh,
the
I think
future.
there's definitely California influence there without a doubt. And yeah, so I think there are so many questions. And so I guess the question would be for me, and that is, California, one advantage is you have the Vertebrate Pest Council, you have funding for different projects that other states aren't putting effort into because it's such a widow thing. I mean, I envy the what I call the bug killers and the weed people. They got billion-dollar industries behind them to come up with another active ingredient because they know they've got millions of acres that they can sell for because everyone's going to have the weed problem, everyone's going to have the bug problem. When it comes to vertebrates, you have some really good companies, but they don't have the kind of money to put through the research requirement to get through EPA registration, and there's no money. It's like,
It's,
they would go broke.
it's a really expensive process, and like if you want to get stuff in registered in California, like you need a whole other set of studies
Oh,
and
it's
like a
yeah,
whole other set of
that's
paperwork. It's like
ridiculous.
it's doubly registered. and
Yeah,
and we've gotten really great industry support
right.
from everyone that gives us like hand sanitizer to
Hmm.
companies that are developing isotopically labeled bait with us. So we've gotten all types of, and like all of it matters, right? So like the
Yeah,
isotopically labeled bait is obviously really great, but like we still need the hand sanitizer to make sure
yeah.
we don't die. So
Right.
like
Yeah, but I think but we still need as great as that is, you almost need like a space shot, right? Where you have, it would be, and it's all well and good, and I don't diminish the type of contributions, but I just want our audience to kind of think about, the kind of money you would need to have 10 grad students with two workers
it's
with two assistants for each one for the field component. Now you're able to construct the kind of research where it's dovetailing enough where you can start answering the questions at a group rather than sliver here, then wondering if there's untoward effects that you're missing at the same time. And, is there environmental changes that make this study work better than another? If someone came up, to put some numbers to it, where, dropped 20 or $30 million on you, now you have 10 grad students. They're all, you don't have to train them. They know the statistics, and you're helping them design their model. They're going to do their master's or maybe a PhD. They got two assistants, all the gas money they need, the vehicles, and you just like do it. And, in 3 or 4 years, how much information would you be able to gather out of that? Because you'd have the publications, everything would be funded up the wazoo, and you wouldn't have to be trying to piecemeal stuff together. I mean,
I
that's
think
it's not a lot of money when you think about it, what we blast into space, right? I mean, one trip from a Challenger or something was $1 billion every flight. I mean, we'll just take the fuel that you put in and we'll be fine. And how much we would be able to, and we would have the answers as much as you would ever know the answer. And that's the challenge. It's like, 20 or $30 million in the scheme of things, it's not a huge amount of money, but it is for our industry.
I think if I had 10 grad students, I'd be dead, first of all. But
Well, I mean, I just threw out 10,
yeah.
I think they would be different in the sense if you had some PhD level who are doing their
Mhm.
final thesis and they had maybe some grad students working as their assistants or something, but everyone wasn't worrying about whether they had to, eat at McDonald's this week because they were well funded and you're getting the best students, people really committed. I mean, you'd probably be busy, but you'd also be like, yeah, I don't have to worry about whether I can write this check this week.
Yeah, well, it cost me $80,000 a year to hire staff.
Yeah,
It's a lot, and they don't actually physically earn $80,000,
right.
right?
Those all the expenses and
They have
everything.
great benefits, right? And obviously we have overheads and whatever. And it's a good job, but like when you live in Orange County or LA, it's
Yeah,
really not a lot of money.
no, it's
Now, if
not.
you live in like Modoc up in Northern California,
Yeah,
it's tons of money.
yeah,
Well, not tons of money, but it's certainly more money. But
yeah.
we've been really lucky. I work with Dr. Paul Stappa at Cal State Fullerton.
Hmm.
I've essentially infected his lab with my projects, and he loves them, and I love working with him. And it's really easy to excite him about
Yeah,
rodent work because nobody, like we know, like I say this all the time, we know more about polar bears than we do about commensal rodents, and I don't understand why. And I think back to your point about like funding, part of the problem isn't, I mean, a huge part of the problem is money, but
right.
like How many rodentologists do you have on your, like, as guests on your show? Or how
Well,
many
if I
do you
can,
even know?
well, you have to get them on the show. That's part of the problem. And so, yeah, there aren't many, and I do think there's a glamour. I mean, a lot of people when they go to school to learn about wildlife, they want to go hug a bear somewhere, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it's
yeah.
so the charismatic megafauna. And this is what the problem we have with wildlife damage control or wildlife damage management is. You had students, well, I want to go work for a state agency and go hug a bear. Well, they don't
Mhm.
phrase it quite like that, but that's really what's in the back of their mind, right? And I'm like, because I interviewed some people. I was driving them in a van when I was at the University of Nebraska. I was just a helper over there, and I was driving them. I said, "How many of you are biology students, wildlife students?" And they raised their hands. And I said, "Well, how many of you going into wildlife control?" No one. And I said, "Well, that's too bad because that's at least that's where a job is." And I'm sure they didn't believe me, but because they all think they're going to work for a state agency and go hug a bear, and they're going to
Yeah,
be out in the woods somewhere, and I'm like, that's just not. Even the people who work with bears are primarily in an office and
yeah.
running paperwork or doing FOIA requests all day or getting yelled at by someone. Why are you killing bears? Whatever the case may be. And so it's kind of rats, everyone thinks, oh, it's just a rat or it's just a mouse. And they don't take it seriously. They don't realize the kind of problems that we have.
I mean, there's so many issues, and like there's so many things. Like one of our and like one of our new projects is just looking at rat diet.
Mm,
And we haven't asked for any funding yet, but we are hoping to get some funding for it because the thing about rat diet is, and this is our hypothesis, and I think it's very accurate for roof rats. I'm not sure about mice and Norways, although we will want to look into that as well, is that sanitation actually doesn't matter for roof rats, which is kind of an
oh,
interesting concept because when you
yeah.
think of IPM, and I come from the school of
Mhm.
IPM,
Right, right,
sanitation is almost number one on the
right,
list.
right.
Now, I'm not saying that if you don't have a really bad problem that
Yeah,
sanitation can't help,
yeah,
but like there's no trash in my yard, Stephen.
right.
None. No trash in my yard. I could kill rats all day, every day out there. All day.
Mhm.
All day, every day. There's rats everywhere, all day.
Right.
Right? We have a very roof rat rich environment all over Southern California. And I would say that that's actually extends to a lot of the rest of California. And especially in Southern California, right? We're suburbia, wealthy in a lot of areas. It is not dirty. There is
Right.
no trash.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because people that don't understand management, like what it actually takes to manage rats, like how hard a PMP actually has to work to solve a problem. People that don't want rodenticides, that think that you can solve the issue with exclusion and sanitation. I just don't think that's true, especially for roof rats.
So
Because
let me probe that a little bit more. So if we're talking about keeping the rat out of the structure,
Mhm.
would exclusion and sanitation be sufficient? I'm not talking about the backyard because would that work?
So exclusion is really important. I think
Yeah.
like exclusion is it has to be, I mean, your number one
Number
defense.
one.
I mean,
Okay. So let
right?
me ask the next question. That is, so I think I was told by someone because I don't have any experience with roof rats. I would love to. I think they're really cool. But I was told that roof rats are basically squirrels without the pretty tail. And so, I'm being from Massachusetts. Squirrels were my number one moneymaker. I made money off squirrels more than any other speed. That was half of my business was squirrels. Uh, and so, if that's the case, then yeah, sanitation was not going to solve the problem. Exclusion, if you wanted to keep them out of a building, that certainly did work. Although sometimes squirrels had pretty good chompers. I mean, gray squirrels and fox squirrels. I don't. So that would certainly make a lot of sense. But if you were just trying to keep, so if we need to have a different attitude toward roof rats, that they're not the same beast as Norway.
No, they're totally not. And I think as well, Stephen, like it's different. Like so where I am in Southern California and like other areas of California and the Southwest, It's very different to the freezing cold that a lot of people are experiencing right now, right?
Right.
People live a lot of their lives in the outside of
Ah, yeah.
California.
So then they don't
So
want to see a rat going across their
well, it's
table.
not even seeing it. Like if you like we do a lot of our research in schools, right? And so and I don't know, like I don't have kids, Stephen, and I don't know if this is universal, but it
Hmm.
seems to me that elementary kids are nice and clean and
Hmm.
teenagers are absolutely gross.
Well,
And
it's
that's what it seems like from my experience in the different types of schools in California. However, I go to like very clean elementary schools, and like these janitors just take so much pride in like making their environment for their kids
Mhm.
where their kids eat, right? They eat in the outside. No, very few kids in Southern California are eating in the classroom, right? They're
Oh,
eating
really?
outside,
Okay. All right. Well, that's definitely different.
right?
Yeah.
And so you like it's not like exclusion is not going to solve that. And yet in
Right.
these schools, we were coming across so many rats. And like it was like these schools were so clean that like when it came to us placing like control measures, like I couldn't even really think of places to put them, Stephen, right? We weren't like going like the whole like 15 feet or whatever. Like, we were trying to be very strategic about how we
Mhm.
manage things. And yeah, I'm like, there's so many rats here, and I know because I've caught them. Um, and yet there's no trash, no trash. Trash cans are always covered. They were living in the AC units. They were burrowing. And people always say roof
Roof
rats don't
rats are
burrow. That's
right.
not
They do
true,
burrow.
right?
Right.
It's
They
not,
do
I
burrow.
mean, it's not very common,
Yeah.
but it's not true. And
It,
so, living like burrowing under like maybe like a kind of like a stone step or whatever that was
mhm.
just in front of a classroom that was
Yep.
on like a grassy bit or whatever, but like in these and like we love to trap by the AC units. So like they're and it's funny because there's all these different things that come up, and I don't know anything about construction, but we were kind of talking beforehand about like using ladders and whatever, right? A little bit
Hmm.
before we started.
Yeah.
And so like the reason the ACs are on the ground is because they don't want their maintenance people up on ladders on the roof, right? It's
Right.
it's more dangerous.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. It would
But
be.
but these rats are all over these AC units, like all over them. And obviously you're in Southern California, so you've got lots of AC. And so there's like, there's two or three of these outside, like loads of like different parts of the schools, and
Right. Yeah. It's because it's
best place,
modular. It's
best
essentially.
place for, and we were live trapping the rats for some of our research. So, but
Hmm.
like, but these schools were spotless, spotless. And
So
like
what
I
are they
felt
eating? So what are they eating?
that's what I'm saying, right? It's not I don't think it's a sanitation issue. I think they're relying on landscape plants
Sure. Yeah.
or or like natural vegetation,
Hmm.
or maybe even invertebrates, which would seem a bit weird, but I we don't know. Like we
Yeah.
literally have no
No, I
idea.
think that's yeah, because basically like that's why I wonder if we need to get to a place, or maybe or not me, but Southern California needs to get to a place that roof rats are basically your squirrel, your tree
Well,
squirrel.
we have your squirrels too. Well, we have like the eastern fox squirrels too, and
Yeah,
they
so
they
maybe that's
bite kids in
this
classes
is
in Southern
one this
California.
is one that doesn't have a pretty tail. This one over here has a pretty tail. They're both
Yeah.
just part of the environment. But I just would guess that the roof rats maybe have higher densities than your tree squirrels.
I
Or they're
mean, I
higher.
would say so. And
Yeah.
also, right, tree squirrels are not native to
Right. They've been introduced.
right.
Right. Okay.
The eastern fox squirrel is not native. The eastern gray squirrel is not native, and they're kind of like the urban squirrels. Like we've got
Okay.
like the western,
Yeah.
which is a beautiful squirrel. I always like in
Yeah.
my head, I think, oh, this squirrel is native and it's absolutely stunning, and then this squirrel is non-native and it's ugly, and I think that's coming from Ireland, where we have our own native red squirrel, and then the
Yeah.
ugly American
That's
introduced
right.
British. Yeah,
That's pushing out your red squirrel,
yeah.
right? Well, so I'm looking forward to this research. What is your timeline you're looking at? And is this going to be like a couple of years to get
Yeah,
some
I
of this
mean,
data?
we just started on Friday, and sorry, the diet data or the bait station data.
Whichever project you go
Well,
on.
we haven't started the diet data yet. We still need
Okay.
to try and get some money for it, but we have a great student lined up for the project, which helps.
Hmm.
We just started our bait station research on Friday, and it's so great because it just goes to show you like the variability, and obviously like that's something that we have to come across, but like or we have to overcome, but like the yards are so different. Like sometimes there's like loads of fruit in them, and then the next thing we're in a yard that like has a boat on its porch right up next to a lake. And like they have rats, and someone like everybody with the fruit has rats, and then someone with hardly any fruit has rats, and it's just really, it's very interesting. And it'll be interesting to see like how they use the different bait stations and if we can improve. And like that's what we're trying to do. Like we're trying to improve the use of the bait station.
Yeah.
And like if you can improve the use of the bait station, you can also improve the utility of the trap inside the bait station
Yeah.
too, right? It's not
Yeah.
just about pesticide, but well, not we, but like this industry, 99% of people are relying on these black boxes
Right.
to help them manage their issue. And at least for roof rats, it's just not an appropriate management technique, but we
Yeah.
don't have
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah. And so it makes you, but it's sometimes, if there's a traditionalism in pest control at times where we just do something because it's the way we've always done it.
But
And
what else do you do, Stephen? Where
that's,
else?
I
You
agree.
know what I mean? And I feel like there's literally, like, and this is a terrible pun, but there's literally nobody thinking outside the box.
No, that's well, it's expensive to do so, and then there's always risk. And I encourage my audience, unless 5% of your job should be experiment tweaking with things just to try something new.
You know, but
Obviously it's not scientific research per se, but you're not going to get a competitive edge on someone unless you're
mhm.
doing something different.
I just
And
I just think there's so much pressure on PMPs. Like it's funny, like when we were doing our best management practices, we took over the management of all the accounts, right?
mhm,
We essentially just kicked the PMP to the curb.
right,
And we were in one HOA in Mission Viejo in Southern California, which is very much like a planned community. Like it's
okay,
just planned community after planned community after very, very nice neighborhoods, very well planned. And Terry from Accurate Pest Control, I will tell you that that man earned every single cent of what he was paid for that job. Um,
gosh,
it was like we managed something like 350 something bait stations in one community,
okay,
and like and like we serviced them every 30 days, which was kind of like the norm, right?
mhm,
And like in my head, I'm thinking like every time we did it, I just thought in my head, and like we had to record consumption. Now recording consumption it's not a great way to manage, like to get a gauge on the population, right? Because you could have
right,
one rat that comes back over and over again.
right,
You could have
right.
had one rat that fed right there and then when you put the bait out. But we had other tools that would like helped us, you know you know
Census,
massage the data a little
yeah,
bit to make it make more sense for us. And so we did that, and like it was roasting hot. Obviously I'm Irish, in case anybody hasn't guessed yet, so I'm not like the best person, like you can see here from the skin tone. Like it was really, really difficult. And like I just think, like, how does Terry have 5 minutes to think outside the box? He
right,
just doesn't. Like he really just doesn't. And like it's not only that, like then Terry has to go and do like 300 bait stations in another community.
yeah.
And so I think it would be great if they had the time. I just don't think they're given the time. And often in their license in California, there is no room for creativity, right? If you're a certain license type, you just go and you do what you're told.
Yeah. Well, that's the end of part one of my conversation with Dr. Niamh Quinn of the University of California Cooperative Extension. You can tell she is a wealth of information, and there are very few people that specialized in rodents and rodent control and the whole complexity regarding their management, and she is one of them. So we're really grateful that she came back this year and gave us a 2-hour interview where we were discussing her research and her thoughts about rodent control. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. So we divided this up. I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. And you can give me your thoughts, comments, suggestions for new shows. Perhaps you want to be on the show. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, hope you're going to stay tuned, because we're going to follow up with part 2 with Niamh Quinn, and that's going to be in the next episode. So stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And again, this is Living the Wildlife. Why? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.